Hello, everybody. This is Rogers Harrison, your host of the Sports Deep Dive podcast. We are once again joined by Brian Ingrassia. Hello, Brian. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Last time we talked about college football, but today we're going to talk about baseball,
Excellent.
once considered the American pastime.
Yeah.
Um, so, in an episode of a deep dive podcast, we talked about the minor league baseball classifications. um, which are very different from how they are today. Today, Major League Baseball, minor league baseball funds falls under the Major League Baseball umbrella. It is not two separate entities like it was before. Um, Now, what are your thoughts on that? The fact that MLB is now uh, controlling the minor league baseball.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I live in a city that has as of 5 or 6 years ago, we have a double A baseball team. And I'm a big baseball fan and I love baseball. I'm so glad that we have a minor league team. But it's also, as someone who thinks about the history of these relationships, um, I don't know. I don't think we can, it's hard for us to see minor league baseball as operating in any other way than it does today. But as many of your listeners will know, before the 1960s, there were many, many more classifications of minor league teams, many more
Mhm.
leagues, many more teams. Today, ever since about 1962, we've had single A, double A, triple A, and then there's some, rookie leagues and so forth. But back before the 60s, you had Class A, Class B, Class C, Class D, and just about every town out there, every small city either had a team or had the potential to have a team. And there was this kind of moment after World War II where minor league baseball got really, really big. I'm a historian, so I'm always gonna go back to the history. Basically, you have lots of veterans coming back home. They're not all getting married and having kids just yet, but they're working jobs. They're coming home. They want to see baseball. And minor league baseball just flourishes right around 1949, 1950 or so. Probably, I think 49 is when minor league baseball peaks in terms of attendance and so forth. And then some things happen. And one of those things is television. And television is one of the things that helps to, I won't say kill off the minor leagues, but it makes minor league baseball a lot less appealing. Because if you can sit at home in your living room and watch, I don't know, say the Chicago Cubs or the New York Yankees, why are you going to go out and watch the, Class C, I don't know, like San Angelo Drillers? I just made that up. I don't know if that's a real team. Probably isn't. But television is one of the things that happens. Also, suburbanization and the baby boom. Lots of these veterans, they're having kids, they're moving out to the suburbs, they're buying televisions, they're going to their kids' Little League games. Some historians have even said Little League has something to do with this. And then we start to see by the early 60s expansion where there weren't any teams in Texas, let's say. I'm based in Texas, and so I use a lot of Texas examples. There weren't Texas teams before 62 or so. Well, once 1962 comes along, you could drive to Houston maybe and see a game as opposed to, say, driving to, I don't know, San Antonio and watching a double A game. And so there's all these things happening in the 50s that makes it so that it looks like minor league baseball is going to more or less dry up and disappear. And then that's when the majors kind of swoop in 62 and say, okay, well, we're going to create a much more formal arrangement um, with minor league teams, and they're going to provide money for coaches, managers' salaries, and uniforms, and all these kinds of things. And in some ways, you could say that 1962 arrangement it sort of saves minor league baseball, but I think it also sets up the kind of arrangement where minor league baseball today can only thrive in relation in terms of affiliation with major league teams. So that doesn't quite answer your question, but does give us a little bit of background about how this happened, right? About why today the only real minor league teams, and there's some independent leagues out there, but the only ones that are really thriving are these affiliated teams.
Well, in before you had community owners of these minor league
Mhm.
teams, and then they would have an agreement with the
Mhm.
major league club, and then some major league clubs would buy their minor league affiliates,
Yeah.
and now they've sold them, and they're you know Now most minor league teams are owned by one group.
Hmm.
Um, and so even the ownership has structure has changed for minor league baseball as
Yeah.
well.
And one of the things that I talk about in my research, this is a book I'm working on. I don't know when I'll be able to finish it, but many fans of baseball know that the person who essentially created kind of the modern farm system was Branch Rickey,
Right.
right? Branch Rickey, who's famous for so many innovations in baseball, but one of them is when he was with the St. Louis Cardinals, he had to figure out a way to win, right? It's a relatively small market, St. Louis, which back then was split between the Cardinals and the Browns. And he figured out that what you need to do was control as much labor as possible and control as many players as possible. And that's when he started creating these working agreements with minor league teams, also buying some outright, like the Houston team. I think maybe the Cardinals may have owned that outright. And essentially, it was they weren't supposed to be doing this, but it was a way to stash all these players. And that's why the Cardinals got so good in the 1930s. And I'm a Cubs fan, right? So it pains me a little bit to say this, but to those Cardinals teams of the 30s were so good because Branch Rickey had built such an extensive minor league system in the 1920s and 1930s with all these talented players that they could bring up when they needed, or they could sell them off or trade them to other teams to get the pieces they needed to have a World Series winning team in the 1930s.
Wow. So, but as far as you can see, um, like you said, these small towns,
Hmm.
some mostly in the South, um, had all these teams, and now everybody can watch any major league game now with the regional networks, with Fox and
Hmm.
ESPN and all that. So, what is the what's the draw, the allure of these minor league teams now for fans?
Yeah, I live in a double A city, Amarillo, Texas. We have a nice stadium, a pretty good team. Although, of course, it's always changing affiliation, right? We start out with San Diego, now we're an Arizona affiliate. I think the attraction is, I mean, one of the things they very much sell us on is the idea that you're seeing tomorrow's stars, right? And at double A, you really are. Single A, that's a little dicier. Triple A, sometimes you're seeing yesterday's stars at triple A. At
Right.
a double A level, you definitely are seeing a number of players who within the next few years are going to be in the majors and playing and doing well. I think that's part of it. And ever since about, the 1970s, a lot of minor league owners and teams have been stressing kind of the family atmosphere, right? It's family entertainment. And they have all these giveaways. And one of the things today, if you start up a new team, you've got to have a good mascot because where are they gonna they're gonna make their money off of bringing kids into the park and selling t-shirts and hats. In Amarillo, we have the sod poodles, which was supposedly what they used to call prairie dogs. I don't know if that's really true, but it's a great marketing tool. I'll admit I hated sod poodles when they first announced it, and it's grown on me. My cousin lives in Huntsville, Alabama, and they have the Rocket City trash pandas there.
Yep.
And I think that the way minor league baseball is currently structured, it's both about seeing the future stars, and it's also about these team names and mascots and family promotions and things like that. Now that's very different from how minor league baseball might have been, let's say in a place like Amarillo, Texas in the 1950s, because some of these guys they would never leave. They would come to an Amarillo or a Shreveport, Louisiana, or wherever, and they might stay there forever or for 5 or 10 years, and the fans would get to know them and they could have a comfortable life. They would make enough money, probably not off of baseball, but between their day job plus baseball plus if you hit enough home runs, like the fans will, like in Amarillo, they would shove like dollar bills through the chain link fence, and give them to these guys, and it was an incentive for these players to stay in one place. Well, maybe I'll never make it to the majors. This is the era before free agency, so there was a lot less opportunity to move up to the majors for some of these guys. But they did kind of develop a comfortable life in a place, and they stayed there, and that doesn't happen anymore. if a player is with a team, an affiliated team for 2 or 3 years, that's a long time. Otherwise, we're constantly seeing players move to AAA Reno or to Major League Arizona, to Phoenix. And so it really has to be so much about, again, the team name, the mascot, the stadium, the promotions, and the idea of watching future stars as opposed to, oh, that's the player that's been here for the last 5 or 10 years.
Well, it's funny because I mean, so you mentioned the mascot and the team name and the
Hmm.
ability to sell merchandise. And when these major league clubs used to own their minor league affiliates, they would just give them the major league name.
Yeah,
For the Atlanta Braves, you had the Rome Braves and the Mississippi Braves,
yeah,
Gwinnett Braves, and the Richmond Braves, and stuff like that. Well, as time has gone on, the Braves realized they could make more money when they own their affiliates. They don't own them anymore. If they, change their names to their team name to another name,
yeah.
that way they could sell more merch.
Yeah, I remember going to I think a Gwinnett Braves game one time
Yeah,
in Metro Atlanta, and I can't remember what they're called now. I know they've changed that name.
they're the Gwinnett Stripers,
Stripers, that's right.
named
Uh,
after the striped mouth bass
that's
fish.
right. Yeah.
Mhm.
And what, like, I keep thinking of Amarillo where I live. They for a long time Amarillo had a minor league team called the Gold Sox. That was the local name. And then once you started seeing after 1962, once those that kind of tighter relationship with Major League Baseball was created, then you saw these names that were much more associated with the Major League team. So for a while they were an Astros affiliate. I think Amarillo was like the Sonics. We had an Air Force base, so it made sense to have a something about aviation. And then for a while they were the Amarillo Giants when they were a Giants affiliate. And I think it got to the point where it was hard to, yeah, if you have these affiliates moving around or the affiliations moving around, you don't want your team to be the Giants one year and the Angels one year, and 5 years later you're the Athletics or the Cubs or whatever. And I think eventually it got to the point where they realized that if you want to have people coming out to the stadium, you're going to have a local identity, and that's why we had a big naming contest here in Amarillo where I was like, what are we going to be called? And it was all these kind of weird locally themed names, and we ended up with the one about prairie dogs. But I think that happens in a lot of places now, is because you need to have people feeling connected to their local team at the same time you want them to know that, oh, you're going to be watching players who might be in the majors here 2 or 3 years from now.
Well, okay, so that's the thing I want to discuss about. Excuse me. So if I'm a follower of if I'm a fan of a major league team, I like the Braves. You say you like the Cubs,
Yeah.
and we get attached to certain players. Like,
Hmm.
for years I enjoyed watching Freddie Freeman play.
Oh yeah.
Growing up, I watched Dale Murphy. A Cub fan my age would probably enjoy watching Ryan Sandberg and
Yeah.
that type of thing. But in the minor league world, you will only see a good player for at the most for a season.
Hmm.
Sometimes that player's moved up the ladder, whether it be to AAA or to the major
Yeah.
leagues, or halfway through the season. So, talk about that, about how fans, kind of get their favorite player ripped from them, so to
Yeah.
speak, as they're watching them.
Well, and I think this is more generally something we've seen in the era of free agency in baseball ever since the 1970s, right? It used to
Yeah.
be, you look at, say, an Ernie Banks, who spends his entire career with one team, or Billy Williams, who spent nearly his entire career with one team. And then you look at, say, some of the players in the era of free agency who just every 3 or 4 years might be with a different team. I don't know. I'm thinking for some reason I'm thinking some of those great Oakland Athletics players that ended up going to the Yankees, like a Reggie Jackson or a Ricky Henderson, and then sometimes they'd come back or go to a different team. That's something we've been seeing for I guess about the last 50 years or so, but it's really accelerated in minor league baseball because the whole point is maybe you start out in single A, move up to double A, move up to triple A, up to the majors within 3 or 4 years, maybe quicker if you're a really great player. And I think about again, I'll use Amarillo as an example. In the early '80s, Amarillo was a San Diego Padres affiliate, and probably the best player to ever play in Amarillo was a guy named Tony Gwynn.
Yeah.
And if you look at Tony Gwynn's 1 month in Amarillo in like 1981, he was amazing. I can't remember the his averages in like the 400s. His OPS is out of this world. Um, and so I think in a weird way, a lot of those we only get those players for a brief moment. Or like a few years ago, we had Fernando Tatis Jr. for like 6 games during a rehab stint. But what I've discovered, at least with my current city, is they keep doing these kind of promotions where it's like, let's relive the great era when we had this player for a season. And they're still doing like, I don't know, Corbin Carroll bobblehead giveaways because Corbin Carroll played here and he's really good. He's with
Yeah.
the Major League Club. And so in a weird way, kind of the memory of some of those players lives on. At the same time, it's they're looking both back to the past and forward to the future, right? Who's playing now that's going to be, an all-star in a couple years from now, but who was playing here 5 years ago who maybe is an all-star right now? And in a weird way, it's about the game on the field, but it's also about kind of being part of this longer stretch of baseball history. And baseball is a sport that's very, very invested in its history. So that sort of makes sense.
Well, another thing is the fans can also follow that player through the ranks.
Hmm.
And let's say that, you're affiliated, the team you live nearby is affiliated with the Diamondbacks. And so you could
Yeah.
watch, your favorite third baseman for the Sod Poodles go on to Arizona, for
Yeah.
instance. And then you could tell people, hey, I knew him when he was just a
Yeah.
year old guy who couldn't field very well, but now he's in the major leagues.
Yeah. My hometown is right outside of Peoria, Illinois. It's a single A city, kind of the Midwest League. And when I was a kid, we had these guys coming up through it was called the Peoria Chiefs. They were a Cubs affiliate back then. Guys like Greg Maddox and Mark Grace, some of these
Yeah.
great Cubs players. But then, of course, what happens is they change the affiliations every few years. And so with the Peoria Chiefs, located halfway between Chicago and St. Louis, it feels like about every 6 or 8 years they change the affiliation between the Cubs and the Cardinals. And so in a weird way, yeah, you can follow those players, but like, now if I go home and watch a Peoria Chiefs game, I'm like, well, I guess I'm watching the future Cardinals stars as opposed to future Cubs stars. And I don't know exactly why they do that. I'd like to know more, but I think it's partly so that no one little city gets tied just to one major league team, right? That, Amarillo doesn't just become a feeder to San Diego, but this year we're a feeder to Arizona, and maybe in 5 years we'll be a Houston minor league team or a Texas Rangers minor league team or something. I think that's good for Major League Baseball. I don't know if that's as good for a smaller city to have those affiliations kind of constantly moving around.
Well, before the contracts were for 7 years that
Hmm.
majors and minors would
Yeah,
sign. And that was before Major League Baseball took over and then, shed some minor league
yeah,
teams and condensed it to now, I believe we have 140.
it's right around there. Yeah, I
Yeah. So,
think yeah, every team has a triple A, a double A, and two single A. So 30.
yeah,
It's at least 120 before you take into account those rookie league teams.
yeah, I think they might have done away with the rookie league.
Oh, really? Okay. Again,
Yeah.
I always like to say as a historian, I know the stuff going on 50 years ago better than I know the stuff happening the last year.
All right. Well, before we end this podcast, is there anything else you wanted to talk about as far as minor league baseball's relationship to the major leagues?
Yeah, I think something I'm starting to learn is kind of how much um, as historians, we often talk about the reserve clause, right? And any listeners who know about the reserve clause know that there's this kind of weird idiosyncratic thing in baseball and other sports too, where basically once a team owns a player, it used to be before the 1970s, they basically owned that player's contract forever. That changes in the 1970s with the era of free agency. Um, And we know that story, right? How that changes. And what I'm discovering is that the story of minor league baseball in relation to Major League Baseball is very much, it's kind of around something called territorial rights, which is a kind of a comparable idea that's been around organized baseball since at least the early 1900s, if not the late 1800s. And it's this idea that basically once a Major League Baseball team has an affiliate, either if they're in a city or if they have an affiliate in a city, they control that territory.
Right.
And in some ways, it's almost like a reserve clause for cities. And I think that as I've been doing my research, I haven't quite articulated this yet, but the story of minor league baseball, especially over about the last century or so, has been about, a handful of major league clubs really um, using the idea of territorial rights combined with Major League Baseball's antitrust exemption, which comes from a really weird, idiosyncratic 1920s court case, basically using those things together, combined with the reserve clause, to control who plays baseball in which cities and at what level, right? That it is 30 major league owners essentially in the two leagues, Major League Baseball, that can say, we're not going to have a major league team in Sacramento. We're going to have a AAA team in Sacramento, or, maybe we'll have a major league team in Nashville one day, but for right now, you're AAA and you can't be anything else. And I don't think we spend enough time talking about how those kind of those arrangements and what makes a minor league city versus a major league city. So much of that is controlled by essentially a monopoly, right? Major League Baseball
Yeah.
is a monopoly
Yeah.
with an antitrust exemption, and they have so much power over who gets to play at what level in which city in North America, essentially. And that's really, it's a complicated legal and kind of geographical history that I'm trying to tease out in some of my research.
All right. Well, on that note, we will leave you with that. Brian, I enjoyed our time together for
Thank you.
this podcast. It was great having you.
It's good being here.
Um, be sure to listen to other episodes of the Sports Deep Dive podcast, and we will see you next time.